Dave Peaty. I am the current board president of PPN, Publishing Professionals Network, and really glad to be here today. We do these sort of monthly, I don't know what the right adjective is, sort of monthly professional development sessions via Zoom, which is great because we can reach a lot more people, obviously, than we can in person. And it's a broad range of topics that we cover. If you're not familiar with Publishing Professionals Network, please check us out. We are at pubpronetwork.org. We are an all-volunteer nonprofit. We are here to support each other and to celebrate excellence in bookmaking. So I won't go on a long spiel about PPN other than to say it's super cheap to join. It's like $25 a year. There's no reason not to. It's a great organization to be a part of. I think there's so many things that we engage in, including we do an annual conference and we do an annual book awards show. And in fact, we're gearing into that right now. So I'll keep it short because I really want to allow our guest, John Barry, who has been and will be a judge in the book show, to talk about what we thought was, this little kind of very narrow, and that's literally and figuratively, topic of book design, which is the spine. So important, and yet it really often doesn't get the attention it deserves. And based on the number of people who signed up, it's clear that a lot of people understand the importance of spine design. So I'm going to kind of sign off. What we're going to do is let John do a presentation on spine design for roughly 30 minutes, half an hour-ish, and we'll take the Q&A at the end. Please feel free to drop your name and contact information, where you're zooming in from, in the chat, but hold off on the questions, putting the questions in the chat until the end, so that we don't have to kind of go back through and try to find whatever question you had, which is probably a very good one, and just wait until that end. Okay, so what I'm going to do is try to pin John if I can. And John, I'm going to let you do your own introduction and all your credentials because they're too numerous for me to list here, and I'll let you pick your favorite ones. So
credentials.
Okay.
My Junior Birdman badge. Hi, I'm John Barry. I'm an editor and typographer, is how I describe myself, which covers everything, really, content and design. I love books, I love reading books, and I design books based on wanting to read them. So, this topic is one that gets ignored most of the time, doesn't get a lot of attention. So, and it's important though, because it's the first thing we see. Let me share my screen here. It always finds the wrong screen first. Okay. This is not what we're talking about, although it is quite literally a book spine. That's why we have book spines. And this is what modern book bindings tend to look like, even if they're in signatures, they're still glued in so they don't open flat, but that's a different question. So what we have, the spine, for our purposes is, come on, advance. Whoops. There, this all looks familiar to all of us. We have shelves of books and spines, and that's all we see. That is how we find books. And so in a sense, I should point out, I'm talking about printed books here. Printed books have spines pretty much by definition, almost at least. Ebooks, electronic books do not, also by definition. They don't even have covers, properly speaking, even though we do things that look like covers. They're really thumbnails that function as icons, as a pointer to the book. That's a totally different subject. But you could argue that the spine actually is, in a sense, the equivalent of that icon. It's our pointer to the book. And as I said, it's the first thing you see on a bookshelf. And in a bookstore, if it doesn't grab your attention and make you want to pull it off and look at the book, It's the only thing you see of the book. So that's why it's important. Book cover designers sometimes pay attention to the spine, sometimes are asked to design the spine and the back cover, sometimes not. But it is important because I don't know why this does not want to advance. There. One of the great spine designers was William Addison Dwiggins. Dwiggins did an enormous number of book designs in the early 20th century. This is just a swath of them. Very few of us today would do something like this. First of all, usually if it's a hardcover, it has a dust jacket, and these probably did have dust jackets originally, which he probably designed as well. But it's rare to have the spine of a book today elaborately designed like this. And one of the things you notice here is that almost all of them are horizontal, because the books are standing up, but the titles and the authors' names for most of them are the right way to read as you look at it. And Dwiggins did some very interesting ways of dealing with this, such as the Caribbean Sea, Sea of the New World, breaking words, speaking of man, Tartar in of Tarascon. It's just playing with it, but it gets it there, so you can read it. It's an argument against, or sort of an argument against running it up or down the spine so that you have to bend your head. Obviously, with something narrow enough, like a report of the currency, that's not an option. He probably could have tried over on the left Gulliver's Travels in some horizontal way. It would have required a bunch of breaks. And one of the things that Dwiggins was a master of was ornament, which he created himself. So for instance, the ornaments on Gulliver's Travels were undoubtedly ones that he made, possibly from stencils, which he used a lot. The same thing over here on the foundation stone, Llewellyn Warren. So I've never tried anything like this, but it is interesting to take a look at. And this is one of his, The Time Machine. And it is in a case, in a slipcase. So not in very good shape, I'm afraid. This is what the slipcase looks like. But you realize that a book in a slipcase has two spines. That is, the book has a spine, and that sticks out of the open part of the slipcase. That's what it's meant to do. But the slipcase itself has a spine. And I've heard people argue about which edge of the book should be displayed outward on the bookshelf. You have all kinds of books, all kinds of bindings. This is an old Encyclopedia Britannica from the 1911 edition, in very bad shape, but as a bookbinder pointed out, just handle it. The more you get human grease on it, the better for the leather binding. But down below, you end up seeing some very interesting solutions to things. For instance, Herb Llewellyn, that's not readable. You can recognize it if you know Herb Llewellyn's style, very 70s. Adrian Frutiger, it's a book about Frutiger. You can't even tell what the title is. It was published by Sindor Press, but his point was, it's Frutiger. His point is not what aspect of Frutiger's type. American Metal Types is very small, but it's easy to find in the space. I've done book spines like that myself, where it's quite small. I find these days that's not what I want to do. I want it to be big and obvious because I want people to be able to see it. Back here. There. So as you see here, book bindings don't always last forever. Again, looking at interesting kinds of spines. Now, I've always liked this Italian dictionary, lavished. Pardon me. Yeah. In some of you may have discovered in the screen sharing a PDF in Zoom. Occasionally the keyboard commands get mixed up. So I won't zoom in again, but that is, well, I will. That is an extreme case, and a very elegant case, very Art Deco case of using the width of a very fat book and using the all the space there. On the other hand, this Collins Robert also does that, but they jammed the lettering together, so it's kind of ugly. I actually tore that jacket off eventually, but the binding underneath is similar. If it just spaced it out a little more, it would probably be a lot more pleasant. Looking at the Chicago manual style gives you a different approach to using the width of the book, not centered, flush left, sort of modernist. Interesting. Dictionaries tend to be always, well, they tend to be big enough and to have use the width of the spine. So here's just a few different kinds of spines. Give you some idea of what's possible. The Russian here, I think is probably quite legible. I mean, it is quite legible. I would have letter spaced it slightly, but that's because it looks like small caps to me, but in fact is normal Russian. It's not small caps at all. And this is, I might space it out slightly because it's on a book spine. Because, of course, most of the time you're not looking at it the way this is stacked up on their sides, on their backs. You're looking at it vertically. So which of these work? How Bluegrass Music Destroyed My Life, beautifully spaced, a little bit it drops back because it's light type, a light weight of type, not quite as contrasted background, but it's lovely. Systems Fail, that's, I would again spaced it out, tracked it a little looser, but it's very clear. Chorus of Mushrooms, on the other hand, at this size you can read it, but because it's very high contrast typeface, it's a little hard at a distance. Let me see if I can get it to go smaller. Sort of looks like Chores of Mushrooms or something like that. It's not clear, so I would not have done that. On the other hand, this Minister Faust book is fascinating because it's quite complex. And he's got an odd name, Minister Faust, so that this design emphasizes that. And the Coyote Kings of the Space Age Bachelor Pad. It's a little hard to read against that background, but it's actually spaced well for that, and the width, the weight of the type helps. It's a weird and complex one, but sometimes those, and of course, it's important that it has faces on it, has images on it, which would be more obvious looking vertically. This is a bookshelf of a printer friend of mine, full of just fine stuff, which is very effective. One of which I recognize, the Hayden Carruth book, is one I designed. So I wanted to make sure it was very readable. The Rag and Bone Shop of the Heart is, again, taking advantage of the width. On the other hand, Given, Wendell Berry poems, it has to be narrow. What else are you going to do? I probably would have used all caps for that because it's a little easier to read and because it doesn't have any ascenders or descenders. But there are schools of thought on that. Just looking down here, I find this really interesting. I'm not quite sure what that book is. Obviously, it doesn't have a title on it. And I think it probably is literally a binding sample. I have to ask. So You see the variations. And of course, these are all pretty much all American books, almost all anyway, or North American books. So if they do have the title running down the spine, it runs down from top to bottom. In continental Europe, it's usually the other way around, running up from bottom to top. These are not always consistent in either location, but in general, we have the opposite approach, which means that in a European bookstore, you're creaking your head one way, in an American bookstore, you're creaking your head the other way. So this is actually bookshelves in our dining room. And one of the reasons I put this in here was, what is the distance you're seeing the book spine from? What does it have to do? What is its function? If you're in a bookstore, browsing the shelves, especially a crowded bookstore, it may only be 3 feet away from you, in which case that's okay. But this is a little farther. This is probably 6 to 8 feet away. So which of these stand out and which ones do not? It's interesting. And I know, because I've often sat there looking at it, that this particular novel here, Telling the Map, drives me nuts, because it's a typewriter typeface, or an imitation of it, monospaced, and I keep reading it as Telling the Nap. Telling the Map, because it is the same width. So if I were designing that, I would have tried something different. I'm sure there's a good reason for having the typewriter typeface there, but no. And then looking at another couple of them here, the Swanwick, Michael Swanwick, the dog said bow wow. Swanwick and bow wow are both very clear. They're bold, not too tightly spaced, and the light blue stands out against the black. The white stands out against the black, but both Michael and the dog said are in a very lightweight, and they are jammed together. So there's no space to be able to distinguish those words easily at a glance, especially at an angle. So that's an important part about book spines. You're usually not looking at it this way, you're looking at it upright. And it needs a little more letter spacing to be clear, even if it's lowercase, a little, just a tiny bit, but always if it's all caps. Howard Waldrop's Hard Starts is one that I designed, and I wanted to make damn sure that it stood out on a bookshelf. And there's something I mentioned before, writing about this. Black and white are the most sort of the default colors for type book cover. And if it's against a color that both of them will stand out against, that works well. In this case, it's a grid blend. So I made sure that the Waldrop would stand out against the light green, and the Hard Starts had the slightly darker background, so it could be red. This includes some books that I've designed, and some I haven't. The Eclipse books I did not design. The Kafka book I did not design. But I designed, this is my partner Eileen Gunn's second collection. I'll show you a bit later. I wanted it to be very clearly readable. People would look first for her name, but also it's a great title, Questionable Practices. So I wanted it to stand out. And that's a question in Bookspot. What's the most important element? I remember years ago being told by a bookseller that booksellers prefer to have the author's name at the top of the spine. I suppose because it's easier for sorting and finding things and alphabetizing. So I usually tend to do that just to make booksellers happy. It's not universal, definitely. I also designed this one. Well, that's not easy to see that way. But the Wisconsin, just did it again. Anyway, this was part of a series. The one to the left of it and the one to the right of it are also part of the same series that I did not design. And I think you can probably which one is easier to read on the bookshelf. This one here, it's, the Wisconsin Chronicles, if it were spaced out a little bit, would be reasonably readable. The purple, whatever that font would be, is not readable at all. This one over here, they did a weird sort of, not shadow, but it's sort of a blur behind the title, the type to make it readable, but it's not inherently a readable typeface. So these books have long titles. So you have to decide what part to emphasize on a spine. Because of course, the point is to make somebody reach out and grab this book. That's why it's there. That's why it has a spine design. One book that I did a lot of book design for Copper Canyon Press, mostly back in the 90s, some later. This Kenneth Rexroth Complete Poems was a delight because there's this great photograph of Rexroth. It's a thick book. I didn't have to run type down the spine. And it worked very well. This one in the middle, Sam Hamill's, of course, is not so wide, so it's a little obscured by the light shining on it. But the point was to make his name visible and a poet's work very, very visible. On the other hand, you look over here at these Neil Stevenson books, and although they're big fat books, they could have done horizontal type. They did not. And System of the World is sort of readable. The one next to it, I'd have to go look at my bookshelf to remember what the title is, because as you can see, it's not readable. These are books that I designed. Little Big being the biggest by far. It is a huge project. It finally got published after 17 years. There was no question it was going to be horizontal and using an image from the book. So that was easy. There's the wall shown vertically. This Peter Nichols book was one done for, all of these are done for small presses, by the way, small independent publishers, which is nice because they don't necessarily pay a lot, but they give you a great deal of creative freedom. This Peter Nichols book, I deliberately made it try to look like a sort of 70s book because it's essays from the 70s. The genre fiction, The Roaring Years, is less of a grabbing title than anything else. So I made it look like I hope you would be curious is the point and pick it up. These two novels I've done for Sandra Bond, different typefaces, but similar treatment, deliberately similar treatment. I'm currently working on a third book of hers, and they stand out. That's the whole point. They stand out. Antiquities stands out a little more subduedly, but it was a very classic looking book. That was the whole. Atlantis Three Tales doesn't stand out as well as it might. Here's Questionable Practices next to Eileen's first book, Stable Strategies and Others, where you can see what I did with the title there. I played with the front cover also plays with typeface and color and size in the title. So I'm not sure Strategies stands out quite enough with the red there, but it works enough to get people curious. The Stable definitely does. And these are two different publishers, but I wanted them to look like they belong together, as they do. And finishing up, I'm going to show a few covers, or in this case, jackets, just to show you how the spine fits together with the rest of the book, or the rest of the cover. So if you visualize, Arneson Hidden Folk is very, very clear, very big, and again, black and white against a background color that they both stand out against. It echoes the cover, the front, and I designed it all to fit together logically if you're looking at it. But of course, the spine just has to be there, make you grab the book and pull it out. This book of W.S. Merwin was, again, the spine stands out and it is integrated with the front. And an interesting thing, I was using Robert Simbach's Poetica typeface for the titling typeface, and it has a whole slew of alternate ampersands. So in fact, in this book, every time I you did the title here, here, and here, and also on the title page, I would use a different ampersand. Some fun. Here's the Peter Nichols book, so you can see that this sort of 70s feeling I was after on the front, sort of 70s British, which is exactly what it was. British critical writing in the 70s. Although Peter was actually Australian, but he was London-based for many years. And here's the questionable practices. Again, you can see how the front fits together with the spine. I did not want to use the typefaces I'd use for Eileen's name on the front on the spine, because it wouldn't stand out the same way. Even if I did them all in all caps, the busyness of those slab serifs would probably not have helped on the spine. So I used an alternate sans serif version. If I remember correctly, this spine type is literally the same font as this. It's just in all caps and spaced a bit. And this one was fun. This rewired. I'd always wanted to use this typeface, this Jonathan Heffler typeface. Very odd, very quirky. And I thought there's never going to be a use for it. But this worked because of the title and the subject. It looks techy, the post-cyberpunk anthology. The word rewired is familiar, first of all, and has repeated letters. So it makes it very easy to tell what it says, even though it's a very quirky typeface. And I made sure that the subtitle is very prominent if you weren't clear on that. But for the spine, the last thing I was going to do is use a weird typeface like that. So on the spine, it's very straightforward, emphasize a little with drop shadow to make it stand out and be very, very readable. Go effects I'd use elsewhere. So on a book cover, especially on a spine, if your author's name is unfamiliar or the title is weird words that you don't immediately recognize, don't use a fancy typeface. But if it's something that is instantly recognizable, then maybe you can get away with it, as I think I did here. And ending up, this is back in the world of books on shelves. So I'm ready to take questions.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it. Folks, if you want to go ahead and put your questions in the chat, feel free. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, John. Can you hear me okay?
How are we doing the questions?
John, can you hear me?
I'm not hearing anything.
Okay. Let me try moving for a second. Can you hear me now?
In here? I need to put on my glasses to see them. Will this be recorded? Yes. Yes. This is all about people who couldn't be here.
Can you hear me now, John?
Oh, I love this comment. Hi, I am an AI assistant helping Karen Lomax take notes for this meeting. And incidentally, I put in the beginning of the chat a link to the article that I wrote more than 20 years ago about this subject called putting some spine in design. It's putting the spine in book design. So it's up there at the top. Interesting. Hal O'Brien saying Zoom isn't cooperating with italics. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, Hal. I'm seeing everything as interesting comments, but I'm not seeing questions.
I've got a question, but it's down at the bottom.
Swanwick Bow Wow is certainly eye-catching and intriguing, and I did not design that one. Peter Goodman, isn't the spine font and colors determined by the title font and colors, or should they be? What works on a front cover might not work on a spine, so I wonder what is the thinking about when and if to treat them separately. Well, that's exactly it. That's yes, generally I would treat them consistently, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't. They need to be complementary in some sense, which is why I did the totally different typeface for Rewired on the spine than on the front. But yes, I try to keep it consistent, and sometimes I'll design something where front, spine, and back are all sort of together. I always try to keep them in consistent. Usually keeping the alignment the same across, but not always. Sometimes, for instance, the spine especially doesn't have to match up with the alignment of the front and back elements. It's nice if it does, but sometimes it's better to just give it the space it needs. Let's see. I'm still not seeing questions. I see the AI reported well. Good AI. Happy. And let's check this. I'm going to put the link again to everyone once more for my article from Creative Pro. So there it is, if you want to read that. Italics with one word, but we can go back. Spine width, Doug Milhoff asks, well, spine width. It depends on the book, obviously. I've designed spines for very thin books of poetry where there really isn't much you can do except all caps, run down, spaced enough to be clear. And obviously I've designed things as fat as little big. But the spine width, I think you could take Dwiggens's example as license to play with horizontal setting on a narrower spine. Obviously not a very narrow spine, but would that kind of breaking up of words work on it today in a bookstore? It might. It depends on the words, of course. It depends on how they're broken and whether, as in Dwiggens's, they're intriguing enough to make you go, whoa, what's that about? That looks cool.
Can you hear me?
There is communicating information, just the words, the name, the title, maybe the publisher's logo or name. And there's also just making it cool, making somebody go, I have to find out what this is about. And that having both of those is ideal. Incidentally, publishers' logos, I've seen and I've dealt with it two different ways, whether they're always the same size, no matter the width of the spine, or whether they vary to match with it. And I've seen it done both ways. I think if they get too big, it's distracting. It does depend on what the logo is like, for instance. No, I'm not hearing anybody.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, hi, Doug. I see you, but I just realized. Huh. Let me turn up the volume. Let's go on mute. Say something. No, now it's coming through. I don't know why.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can. I apologize for not
Okay,
having gotten
yeah.
that right. I saw you put a bunch of questions in, but I didn't hear you.
I wanted, yeah, I'm not a very fast typer, so I wanted to discuss how a couple of times I've worked on books where I've got no idea how thick it's going to be because of the paper material, binding style, or not even given enough information how many pages, etc. Also, the type of book can determine the style. Like a discussion that kind of brought this on was a coloring book I did that the mistake was everything was a 2-page spread and it's blue binding, so it just kind of all fell out.
Right.
But the binding choice can be important for the type of book, and that in turn affect the thickness of the spine and what you can do with it.
Absolutely. And you have to know that. I mean, the problem is even when I know how it's going to be bound and how who's printing it and stuff, I have to know the final page count to know the exact spine width. So for instance, I used to design, it's interesting. I used to design in InDesign front, the back, and the spine separately, and at the end put them together. These days that's very rare. I do the whole thing together as one page essentially, because that's how it's going to end up. But I have to conceive the spine separately.
Yeah.
But I have to, before I do the final one, I have to have the actual spine width. And you're absolutely right. It varies depending on the binding method, on the page count, obviously, but the paper stock, and you have to get that from the printer. You just ask the printer, all right, here's the final page count. Give me a width, give me a spine width. And yeah, they'll usually give you a template, and then you can adjust that as needed.
I'm also noticing there seem to be two basic philosophies. One is to grab your eye when it's on the shelf.
Mhm.
And the other one is to look good if you already know what it is. If you're looking for a specific book.
Yep. I consider them both. I consider my job to make it work on both ways, both of them. Because for one thing, you know, in a bookstore, it's new to you. On your bookshelf, it's not new to you, but you want it to look good on your bookshelf and be findable and all that. So I think those are, I don't think of that as either or, although you're right, they are two different aspects.
Yeah, a lot of the time you might be getting a specific book, say the encyclopedias or a dictionary. You know what you're getting already. You know what it is, so you have the liberty to go for something that's more elegant and maybe a little bit less instantly legible. And then you had that one with that font where the R could just as easily be a Q.
Yeah.
And that was an example of you better be able to tell what word that is, or
exactly, as I said, and I think got away with it in that case, but I would not do that for anything else. I want to go move on. I see a question from Peter Goodman here. How much safe area is enough between the spine text area and that of the back and front covers to allow for printing variations? He says, my sense these days is the POD books are not as exacting as offset. So spine type could wrap to front or back if it's too tight. Shouldn't happen, but it does. Absolutely true. And that isn't just POD. That's true for a traditionally printed book too. You have to allow, well, you want it to be precise, and that's very frustrating if you try to get the spine type centered, assuming centered is what you want, spaced exactly the way you want it. But you always have to allow for error, even in traditional printing. And yeah, POD, I just got one that, let's see. I just did this, I think you can, there. It's not so obvious on screen, but it's not quite centered, and the cover is shifted away from the spine. It shouldn't be quite so tight over there. And I don't know whether I don't think that's my error. I'm going to go back and look. I just got copies of this. Go back and look in my files and see whether I screwed up or whether they gave me, in this case, perhaps the wrong spine width template. I don't know. So yeah, those are serious questions. The other interesting thing I've discovered with POD, or at least I think it's Amazon, but I've done a couple of books for a publisher that uses that, as he's pointed out that the placement on the back of the barcode is always approximate. And I have always tried to make that barcode an element, a design element on the back. So that was a hard one to get used to. Let's see, do we have more questions? Anybody has them, feel free to unmute and.
You know, actually, I have to set that up. So if you can raise your hand, then I'll digitally, then we'll try to unmute you. But John, a quick question. Hold on a second. On the same topic, in terms of, you know, you get these templates from a printer, they ask for a pretty significant buffer if it's a pretty small book, and all of a sudden your real estate was really reduced. But I noticed on so many of the books that you showed, they went right to the edge of the spine. They, you know, I don't know if it's they felt confident in the printer pulling it off or what. Have you ever designed a spine and then had the printer say it's outside of the specs and therefore we can't do it? Or
I don't think so. I'm trying to remember. No, I've had I've had the flaps that I designed. Suddenly I discovered that they can't do flaps on a jacket that are as wide as I want, for instance. That's very frustrating. I did a book many years ago, big wide format. It was meant to be a hardcover. In the last minute, the publisher decided they couldn't afford that and did paperback. And I had spec'd, even when it was hardcover, I'd spec'd like 5-inch flaps or something because it's like a 10-inch wide book, and then discovered at the last minute, oh no, we can't do that. Oh, we'll give you a 3-inch flap. And then because it was on the soft cover, it really screwed it up. I could probably find it, but I don't want to show that.
okay, Hal, you got a question?
Sure. First of all, John, Dave, thank you very much for setting this up. And as I said early on, I was very pleasantly surprised to see you here, Dave. But John, as you know, we have a mutual friend who has just about an entire shelf of the vintage contemporaries from the 80s and 90s. And you know, one, they're all so consistent across that entire series. And two, they have that spectral effect where the author's name changes colors and they go from, I want to say, from blues all the way up to reds. And I was just, now that limits the size of the author's name. And so presumably you have to play around with size.
Right.
But I was just wondering if you had any thoughts of that particular series, because I think it's a relatively famous series, but I'm curious to know your thoughts.
I'd have to look at them because I'm not visualizing it as well as I should. But I love that question,
Okay.
how to do series. I mean, how to make books like they look like they belong in a series while looking distinctly different. And
Well, I was about to say, I don't know if you remember Jay McInerney's, oh, now I'm blanking on the title.
Oh, I never did that.
Yeah, I know.
I don't remember it. I don't
Is it the stroke? Is it age? Is it MS? Do that differential. But oh, never mind. If I can't remember it, I can't. Oh, it's all told in second person.
I haven't read McInerney's stuff, so I don't know.
Yeah.
How to design a spine in second person.
No, it's not the spine, it's in second person.
Okay, if you think of it, come back.
But yeah, it is that entire series. It's Andy. It's Andy, and he has that entire shelf where he goes through it. Like I say, a mutual friend. Not everybody here would know. Anyway, I'll shut up now.
So you have to design, you want to design a spine. If there is a series, you design it so it fits in a case like that where they are all together. But you also have to design it so it's just sitting there by itself next to unrelated books on the bookshelf.
I think Catherine Charbonneau has a series that she's has the ability to share. So
cool. Let's see, Catherine.
Hi. It's a collection from a publisher I used to work with, and they have like novels. It's pretty simple, but it's all color.
Yes.
So all the books, the spine is always at the same text. The logo here is always placed at the same place, and there's a continuity in the covers and in the back, but it's always based on the M centered in the spine.
I love doing that kind of design.
Yeah,
That's
and
great.
when I had to design the spine of those, and like aligning the vertical, that's always different. Like it was kind of always tweaking it so that it fits.
Of course.
It's an example of a really simple spine, but super colorful in a library in your shelves because of the color. And more like children's books.
Yes. Now that.
Yeah, so it's like there's like two. So that's because the book is not always aligned when you fold it. Like when you print, like I don't have the English word for like you print like the wrapping so that it extends to the cover. It's like a normal practice, but like playing with the graphic element too. That's make it playful for the collection.
Absolutely.
And yeah, here again, it's like just a color change too, but it's a collection. And maybe like for pocket books, like we tend to forget about it, but like they make interesting series in a shelves.
Absolutely. Oh, in those cases, of course, I'm looking at this small on the screen, but I would try to make the type there bigger.
They're always the same format, and I guess it's because it's like a series like for hundreds, like all their books would be the same. Like it's not a series of books. It's like all the whole collection is like that. So it's like they need to think of smaller spine.
Yes, exactly. You have to, in a case like that, you have to design for the worst case, the narrowest spine or the longest title or author's name or the most awkward. That's a general principle of book design of any kind, is try to find out what the worst case is so you don't run across, discover at the last part, oh, what a lovely design, but this page doesn't fit, or this cover doesn't fit.
Yeah, thanks. I would mention that the J'ai collection is not mine. It's like something I bought. Okay. And the only design I did on my own is this one. Like the other one, I was doing the mechanicals, but
cool.
Like that designing spine is fun.
Right, reminds me of something I don't think I put into any of the slides, but cases where the spine uses a piece of the cover art, in an interesting way. And sometimes it can be cropped so that it's like you want to see what's missing. That of course does rely on pretty accurate printing. Any other questions? Any brickbats? Anybody telling me I've got it all wrong? Shut up, Hal.
I'll mute myself again. I'm just prone to laughter. I'm an easy audience.
Okay, well, we're going to wind it down. If people want to email us samples of interesting spines or spine disasters, we're probably going to do a follow-up email about this episode of design on professional development, and we would love to include interesting photos of interesting spines, either all things great or all things awful. And I really like that people are sharing the series designs. I don't think there are too many opportunities for us to work on series, especially working in smaller presses. But I have a small press and we have a series, and it was really fun to try to figure out how to make the spines work consistently and still stand out and all that stuff. So thanks again to John Barry, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and I think I can do a little unmute everyone. If you guys want to say thank you to John, and we will get this recording out. It'll take us a couple of days, usually does. Unfortunately, real work gets in the way of us doing things quickly. That's one of the things about PPN. We all have our day jobs, but we're here to support each other. So thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Hey, John. It's been great. Hey, thank you.
Thank
you, Dave, for setting this up.
Happy to do it. Take care, everyone.
You too.